remember the ceiling first, the way it slanted low enough that I could press my hand flat against it when I stood on my bed of rags. That ceiling was my sky. The cracked wood smelled of dampness, dust, and something like old rain. I grew up staring at it until I began to believe the outside world existed only in stories. For 10 long years, that attic was all I knew. My name is Emily Raymond, though I didn't hear my name spoken out loud until I was almost 10. My twin brother Samuel and I used to whisper it to each other in the dark so we wouldn't forget who we were. Our father never called us by our names. To him, we were just the children, sometimes the burdens, but never Emily, never Samuel. When people talk about childhood, they speak of playgrounds and sunlight. For us, there was only one small window nailed shut with wooden planks. Light slipped through the cracks like tiny ghosts. It painted stripes across the floor that shifted with the hours, and I would trace them with my fingers, pretending they were rivers leading to a place I could never reach. The first sound I ever learned to recognize was not laughter or music. It was footsteps, slow, heavy ones that creaked across the floorboards below us. My father's steps. When they stopped beneath the attic door, we froze. The key turning in the lock was like thunder. He would open the door just wide enough to slide in a tray bread, sometimes an apple, sometimes nothing at all. Then the lock clicked again, and silence swallowed us. I didn't understand why he kept us there. I only knew he was the only person we ever saw. He wore black clothes that smelled of sawdust and smoke. His hands were large and cracked, and his eyes, when I dared to look, were always somewhere else, as if staring through me. He said the world outside was dangerous, that people would hurt us, that he was keeping us safe. But the way he said it, I think he was trying to convince himself more than us. When I was small, I believed him. I thought maybe the world was full of monsters waiting beyond the walls. But as I grew, I began to realize the monsters were already inside. The attic was old, part of a house that must have been beautiful once. I remember faded wallpaper curling off the wood, a single chair missing a leg, and the smell of mildew that made everything taste bitter. There were trunks filled with old clothes and broken toys. One day, Samuel found a cracked porcelain doll with one eye missing. He called it Mother. We didn't remember her face, only the scent of lavender that sometimes drifted from Father's coat when he came close. We made games out of survival, counting the seconds between his visits, listening for birds outside, trying to guess what time it was by how the light faded. At night, the rats would scurry near the corners, and we'd name them too, each one our pretend friend. It sounds childish now, but in that darkness, every small thing kept us sane. Sometimes when Father stayed away too long, hunger twisted our stomachs until it hurt to breathe. We'd lick the condensation off the window glass or chew on old scraps of fabric, pretending it was food. The attic became our world, our cage, and our punishment, though we never knew what sin we were paying for. The nights were the worst. The air turned cold, and the wood cracked as if whispering. Samuel would curl beside me, his small hand gripping mine so tightly that our fingers went numb. We'd listen for Father's voice downstairs, praying he wouldn't come up, because sometimes when he did, he brought the belt. He said it was to teach us obedience. He said children had to be broken before they could be good. I never knew what he meant, but the sound of leather sliding through his hands haunts me even now. When I try to remember the first time he locked us up, my memory blurs. I see flashes, a woman screaming, something breaking, Father shouting words I didn't understand. Then darkness. I must have been 3. After that, the attic became forever. One day, I asked Samuel what he thought the sky looked like. He said he didn't know, but maybe it was like the light under the cracks of the planks, soft, golden, and free. We promised each other that one day we'd see it. We even made a pact. If one of us escaped, they'd come back for the other. It became our prayer. Every night before closing our eyes, we'd whisper, "One day we'll see the sky." The attic door had a small square cutout where Father used to slide the food tray. Through that slit, we sometimes caught glimpses of his boots, caked in mud. Once I saw blood on them. When I asked him about it, he said he'd killed a fox that tried to get in. But there were no foxes in our town. I remember feeling the chill of that lie crawl down my spine. We weren't allowed to speak when he was near. Silence was survival. But sometimes he would stand at the door and talk not to us, but to someone invisible, muttering about voices, about punishment, about how she made him do it. We didn't know who she was, but we felt the anger in his tone, sharp as the belt he carried. The years blended together like one long night. We grew taller, our bones sharper, our dreams smaller. We drew pictures on the floor using bits of charcoal from an old lantern. Samuel drew a house with open windows, and a big Sunday I drew two children walking hand in hand toward it. We kept that drawing hidden under a loose board, our secret world where hope still lived. There were days when the silence was so thick that it pressed on our ears until we thought we'd go mad. That's when we started making stories about the life we'd live someday, about our mother waiting for us, about kindness and freedom. Even if they weren't true, they gave us something Father couldn't take: imagination. One winter, the cold became unbearable. Frost crept across the window, and the water bucket froze solid. Samuel got sick, coughing until his chest rattled. I begged Father for help, for medicine, but he only said, "It's God's will." That was the first time I felt real hatred for him, not fear-hatred. That night I held Samuel close and promised him I'd get us out. I didn't know how or when, but I meant it. He smiled weakly and said, "We'll see the sky, Emily. I know we will." Then he closed his eyes. Every story has a beginning. Ours began in that forgotten attic where light was a stranger and hope lived only in whispers. But what we didn't know was that the world below was already beginning to suspect something. Someone had started asking questions about the Raymond family, and soon, the lock on that door would no longer be enough to keep the truth hidden. I always knew there was something different about our father. Even before I understood what cruelty meant, I could feel the strangeness that surrounded him, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. He moved through the house like a ghost, silent, measured, always watching something invisible. When he spoke, his voice carried a calm that was more frightening than shouting. It was the calm of a man who believed everything he did was right. When the lock clicked behind him each day, I would press my ear to the floorboards and listen to his footsteps fade away. Then I'd hear the slow scratching of a pen. Father wrote a lot, pages and pages of words, sometimes muttering as he did. Once, when he forgot to close the trapdoor completely, I caught sight of his study from the attic steps. There were books piled to the ceiling, thick, leather-bound ones with titles I couldn't read, strange symbols, diagrams of heads and eyes. I saw a photograph of our mother on his desk, her face half covered in dust. I wanted to run to it, to hold it, but the sound of his returning steps sent me crawling back into the dark. That night I asked Samuel what he remembered about her. He said only the smell of lavender and a soft humming voice that used to sing him to sleep. I remembered that too, and for a moment it felt like she was there with us again, her song wrapping around the cold attic air. But then the wind howled through the cracks, and the dream vanished. Father never told us what happened to Mother. Whenever I asked, he would stare at me with eyes that seemed to see right through me and say, "She left because she couldn't handle the truth." I didn't know what that meant, but the way he said truth made it sound like something dangerous. As I grew older, I began to notice patterns in his behavior. He always came upstairs at the same times, early morning and just before dark. He'd slide in food, then spend long hours locked in his study. Sometimes we heard him arguing with someone. A woman's name would escape his mouth, Cordelia. He would say it like a curse, like it burned his tongue. Later, I learned that was our mother's name. One afternoon, while Father was gone, a loud thud echoed from below. Samuel and I froze. The sound came again like a door slamming hard. Then a woman's voice shouted something, muffled but desperate. It lasted only seconds before silence fell again. When Father returned that evening, his hands were trembling, and there were dark stains on his sleeves. He didn't look at us when he passed the food tray through the slot. He just whispered, "You're safe now. Don't ever ask about her again." That night, Samuel cried quietly against my shoulder. Neither of us spoke, but we both knew what those stains meant. We were too young to understand death, but old enough to feel its weight hanging above us like the ceiling itself. Weeks later, Father started bringing new things to the attic. Small books he had written himself, filled with strange stories about the outside world. In his tales, the world below was infected with disease and cruelty. People were monsters wearing human skin, waiting to harm children who dared to leave home. He made us read those stories aloud every morning while he listened from behind the door. If we mispronounced a word or skipped a line, the punishment came quick and cold. He also brought objects, jars of colored powders, bottles of strange liquids, and boxes that made clicking sounds. He'd ask us questions like, "What do you feel when I turn off the light?" or "What does hunger make you think of?" We never knew how to answer. He would write down our responses in a notebook, nodding as if we were his students and not his prisoners. As the years passed, his experiments grew stranger. Sometimes he would leave us in darkness for days, saying it was to teach the mind to see without eyes. Other times, he flooded the room with blinding light until our skin burned and we screamed. He would watch quietly, taking notes while we cried. I didn't understand it then, but later, I would realize he was studying us, using us like test subjects for something only he could comprehend. One day, he came with a small metal box that made faint ticking noises. He placed it in the corner and said, "This will keep you safe from the voices." We didn't know what voices he meant, but after that, he forbade us from touching the box. I remember the strange smell it emitted, like burned metal and oil. Sometimes it hummed late at night, and Samuel would cover his ears, whispering that it made his head hurt. Father often spoke about the experiment. We didn't know what it was, only that it ruled our lives. He said he was proving something important, that human minds could be molded, shaped like clay. That fear was a teacher, and isolation was purity. To him, the attic wasn't a prison, it was a laboratory, and we were his proof. He built an entire world for us up there, a false one. He replaced real books with his rewritten versions. He painted the walls with faded skies and told us the color blue didn't exist anymore because the world had gone sick. He played recorded sounds through the vents, fake rain, howling winds, cries that sounded like animals. When I asked him why, he said, "To remind you what's out there." But even in his lies, I began to sense cracks. Sometimes, while cleaning the floor, I found newspaper scraps he used as kindling. On them I saw pictures, carriages, crowds, children playing in sunlight. They were from a world that wasn't supposed to exist, a world he'd stolen from us. One night I found a page that changed everything. It was part of a letter, written in my mother's handwriting. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. "They deserve sunlight, Duncan. They deserve love." Duncan, my father. The name looked wrong beside her gentle words. I hid the scrap under the loose board with our drawing, afraid he'd find it. But that night, for the first time, I dreamed of escape. After that, I started watching him differently. The way his hands shook when he drank, the muttering that filled the house after midnight. He was unraveling. Once I heard him whisper, "They must never see what I've done." There was a storm that week, thunder so loud it shook the attic. For hours we heard him pacing downstairs, ranting about invisible people trying to take us away. When he finally came up, his eyes were wild, and he carried a candle that flickered against his hollow face. He told us to pray. When we didn't move fast enough, he grabbed Samuel's arm so hard it left bruises. After he left, Samuel looked at me and said, "He's going to hurt us, Emily." And I knew he was right. But fate has a strange way of turning. Around that time, I began hearing new sounds, faint voices from beyond the walls, different from Father's. A man calling out, doors creaking, footsteps that didn't belong to him. Someone was coming to the house. We didn't know who, but the fear in Father's eyes each time it happened told me he knew his secret wouldn't last forever. I didn't know then that the man outside was Mr. Perkins, the constable who had started asking questions about the smell, the silence, and the locked windows of the Raymond house. I didn't know that the papers Father burned carried reports about missing children, suspicious deaths, and a wife no one had seen in years. All I knew was that something had shifted. The attic no longer felt endless. For the first time, hope crept in like a whisper. And somewhere below, our Father's secret was beginning to rot from the inside. There are years I can't remember, and then there are years I can't forget. The ones in the attic were both a blur of days that blended into one another, and yet, each moment carved itself into my bones. Time had no meaning up there. There were no clocks, no sunrises or sunsets, just the slow shift of light seeping through the cracks in the wood. Sometimes it was gray, sometimes almost gold, but mostly it was just dim. Father used to call it our sanctuary. To him, it was safety. To us, it was a grave we were still breathing inside. I was 6 when I realized that no one was coming to save us. I remember that day clearly, the day I stopped crying when the door shut and started listening instead. That was when I began to count the steps he took, the hours between his visits, and the patterns in his voice when he spoke through the door. Samuel tried to stay hopeful longer than I did. He made up games, stories, and tiny worlds with scraps of fabric and broken toys. We had an old tin cup we used to pass small notes to each other under the door when Father slept downstairs. The notes said simple things. "Are you awake? Or do you remember the garden?" But even those tiny messages kept us alive inside. The attic was our whole world. It smelled of dust, mold, and something metallic that never went away. The floor creaked when we moved, and the air grew heavier in summer until breathing felt like swallowing smoke. The only window was nailed shut, the glass too grimy to see through. Sometimes, when the wind was strong, a sliver of sound slipped in, a dog barking, a wagon rolling down the street, the faint laughter of children. I used to close my eyes and imagine that laughter was for me. At night, when hunger twisted our stomachs, Samuel would whisper stories about what he thought the outside world looked like. He said there were rivers that sparkled like mirrors, trees taller than houses, and birds that sang before dawn. He described them so beautifully that I almost believed he had seen them before. Maybe he had, before Father locked the door for the last time. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was forgetting what love sounded like. Father's voice had replaced everything gentle. His words were orders strict, cold, final. Eat, sleep, don't question. That was our rhythm. When he was in one of his moods, he'd leave us without food for days. Other times, he'd come with a forced smile, speaking softly, as if we were still his beloved children. He'd stroke our hair, call us my perfect angels, and promise we'd go outside when the experiment was done. I learned quickly that those were the most dangerous moments. That false tenderness always came before something cruel. He once brought us a cat, a small gray one trembling in his arms. He said it was a reward for our obedience. For 3 days, Samuel and I played with it, feeding it crumbs and laughing quietly for the first time in months. On the 4th day, Father took it away. He said it had failed the test. We never saw it again. After that, Samuel stopped laughing. The seasons changed without us knowing. We learned to read time by the cold. When frost crept down the walls, we huddled together under a thin blanket and tried to remember our warmth. When the air grew heavy and still, we knew it was summer again. But no matter how long we waited, the door never stayed open long enough to let real air in. We started marking days on the floorboards, tiny scratches made with a nail Father had dropped once. After a while, the wood was covered in lines. We stopped counting after we reached 1,000. Sometimes Father brought strange objects from his study, old clocks without hands, broken dolls, jars filled with something that looked like honey but smelled of medicine. He'd place them in front of us and say, "Tell me what these make you feel." We didn't know how to answer. When we stayed silent, he'd nod and whisper, "Good, you're learning." Learning what? We never knew. There were nights when Samuel talked in his sleep. He'd call out for our mother, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. I used to shake him awake before Father heard, terrified that his voice would carry through the floor. A night though, I didn't stop him. I just listened. He said, "She's coming back, Emily. I saw her by the door." I wanted to believe him so badly that I stayed awake until morning, waiting for that door to open. It never did. By the time I turned 9, our reflections in the cracked mirror didn't look like children anymore. Our eyes were too hollow, our skin too pale. Sometimes I barely recognized Samuel. His face had grown sharp, his hair long and tangled. He had started carving shapes into the wood with the same nail we used to mark days. Circles, lines, words I couldn't read. When I asked what they meant, he said, "It keeps the dark away." But the dark never left. It lived in the corners, in the silence, in the way our hearts jumped whenever we heard Father's boots on the stairs. There was one thing that kept me going: the scarf. Mother's scarf. It was red once, though time had turned it brown and frayed. Father had left it behind one day, maybe by mistake. I kept it hidden under the loose board near the window. When I held it close, I could almost smell her again, lavender and soap and sunlight. I used to press it to my face and whisper, "We'll see the sky again, Mama, I promise." One winter, the roof began to leak. Drops of icy water fell on us as we slept. Father didn't fix it for weeks, and we woke every morning shivering, our clothes damp and stiff. That was the first time I got sick. Fever burned through me for days, and I drifted in and out of dreams where I saw Mother standing in the attic doorway. She never spoke, just smiled sadly and reached out her hand. But every time I tried to touch her, she vanished like smoke. When I finally woke fully, Samuel was sitting beside me, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He said, "I thought you were gone." I wasn't, but a part of me wished I had been. After that, something inside him changed. He stopped talking as much, stopped eating sometimes. He'd sit by the window for hours, staring at the cracks of light that slipped through. One evening he said, "Emily, what if this is forever?" I didn't answer because I was afraid of the truth. But forever didn't last. One day the sound of voices floated up from below, not Father's, but unfamiliar ones. Deep, serious, questioning. The kind of voices that made Father nervous. He came up to the attic later that night, sweat shining on his forehead, his hands trembling. "If anyone asks," he said, "you say nothing. You hear me, nothing." We nodded, terrified. But that night when he left, Samuel crawled close to me and whispered, "Someone knows." His eyes were bright again, full of something I hadn't seen in years' hope. That was when I realized our years in darkness were not endless after all. Something was changing in the world below us, something big enough to make Father afraid. And if he could be afraid, maybe, just maybe, he could be defeated. The first time I saw Samuel fight back was the night the candle went out. It had been burning for hours, our only source of light, when suddenly the wick gave in, plunging the attic into total blackness. I remember the sound of Samuel's breathing beside me, sharp and uneven. Then he said, "We can't live like this anymore, Emily." His voice didn't sound like my brother's. It was harder, older, like something had cracked open inside him. That night became the beginning of our rebellion, though neither of us planned it that way. He started with small things. When Father told us to sit in silence, Samuel would hum under his breath. When Father demanded we repeat his twisted lessons about obedience and purity, Samuel would answer with nonsense phrases that made no sense. It wasn't much, but it was defiance. And defiance in that place was dangerous. One morning when Father brought food, Samuel didn't touch it. He just stared at the tray until Father noticed. "What's wrong, boy?" Father asked, his voice low and trembling with restrained anger. Samuel didn't look up. "I'm not hungry," he said. Father's silence that followed was worse than shouting. He left the tray there and didn't return for 2 days. By the second night, our stomachs twisted with hunger, but Samuel didn't regret it. He whispered, "He can't control everything. Not if we stop playing his game." I admired him, but I was terrified. Father's punishments weren't just cruel, they were unpredictable. Once, when I spoke too loudly, he locked me in the small storage space under the attic floor for an entire day. It was pitch black, crawling with spiders. I still remember the way their legs brushed against my skin and how I screamed until my throat gave out. When he finally let me out, he smiled and said, "You'll remember that next time." So when Samuel began testing the limits, I begged him to stop, but he only looked at me with those wide, hollow eyes and said, "If we don't fight, we'll die here." He began carving again, not just shapes this time, but words. He used the old nail and scratched messages into the walls. "We are alive. She didn't leave us." He lied. The sound of metal scraping wood became a constant whisper in our dark world. I was scared Father would see, but Samuel didn't care. "If he sees," he said, "then he'll know we remember." One afternoon, when Father was downstairs, Samuel climbed onto the boxes stacked under the window. The boards were old and soft from moisture. He pressed his fingers into the cracks and said, "There's light here, Emily, if I can loosen it." Before he could finish, we heard the familiar creak of Father's boots on the stairs. Panic hit us like lightning. Samuel jumped down, scattering dust everywhere. I grabbed the blanket and threw it over the boxes just as the latch turned. Father entered, his eyes sweeping the room like searchlights. He sniffed the air, then looked at the floor. "Why is it dusty?" he asked. His tone was calm, too calm. My hands trembled behind my back. "We were cleaning," I said quickly. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then, without warning, he struck Samuel across the face. The sound was sharp, like wood splitting. I screamed, but Father only stepped closer, his voice eerily steady. "You think you can trick me? You think I don't see?" Samuel's lip bled, but he didn't cry. That silence seemed to anger Father even more. He turned, seized the candle from the table, and flung it across the room. It shattered against the wall, wax splattering across the floor. "You will learn," he shouted. "You will learn to obey." Then he locked the door again and left us in total darkness for what felt like eternity. When I finally dared to whisper, my voice cracked. "Why did you do that?" Samuel sat with his head against the wall, a dark bruise blooming across his cheek. "Because," he said quietly, "if we don't push back, he wins." Days passed after that incident, and something in Father changed too. His footsteps became more frantic, his muttering louder. We could hear him talking to himself for hours downstairs. "They're ungrateful," he'd say. "They're ruined. She's poisoned them." I realized he meant Mother. One night I woke to find Samuel gone. Panic ripped through me. I crawled toward the faint sound of scratching and found him near the trapdoor, working at the hinges with a piece of metal. "Samuel," I hissed. "He'll hear you." He didn't stop. His whisper came fast, feverish. "I found a loose screw. If I can open this, maybe we can get out. Maybe there's a way down." But before he could finish, the boards creaked beneath Father's heavy boots. We both froze. The sound was closer than ever, the rhythm slower. Each step groaned under his weight. Then, his voice came low, steady, too calm. "I hear you, Samuel." The trapdoor burst open. Father's face appeared in the gap, half lit by a flickering lamp. His eyes were wild. "Trying to escape," he hissed. "Trying to abandon me like your mother did." He climbed up, grabbing Samuel by the arm. I screamed and pulled at Father's sleeve, begging him to stop, but his rage was unstoppable. He dragged Samuel across the room and threw him against the wall. "You're not leaving me," he said. "You belong here." Then he did something I'll never forget. He took a hammer from his belt, I hadn't even noticed he was carrying it, and drove a long nail into the trapdoor latch, sealing it shut from the inside. Each strike echoed like thunder. Bang, bang, bang. With every hit, our hope shrank smaller and smaller. When he was done, he looked at us both and said, "Now there's no way out. You're safe." Then he left, locking the outer door as always. For hours afterward, we sat in silence. The sound of that hammer replayed in my mind until it blended with the rhythm of my heartbeat. But Samuel didn't give up. The next morning, he found the burnt candle stub and used its blackened end to write on the walls. He covered every inch of that attic with words, our memories, our dreams, the names of things we missed. He wrote sunlight, trees, laughter. He wrote mother. He wrote freedom. I think he was afraid that if we died there, someone might one day find the walls and know we existed. Then came the night of the fire. It started with an idea so reckless I almost stopped him. He had gathered scraps of paper, old rags, and bits of straw. "If someone's outside," he said, "they'll see the smoke." I knew it was dangerous, but his eyes were filled with something fierce, a kind of desperate courage. He struck the flint Father had left behind and sparked a small flame. It caught quickly, brighter than we expected. For a brief moment, the attic glowed golden. The walls, the scars, even our faces looked alive again. Then the smoke thickened. We coughed and waved it away, but it was too late. Flames licked the beams above. I screamed, "Samuel, stop it, please!" He tried to smother it with the blanket, but the fabric caught too. The fire roared, lighting up the nailed window like a glowing eye. Father burst in seconds later, his face twisted with fury and fear. Without a word, he grabbed a bucket from the corner and doused the flames. The room hissed with steam and smoke. When it cleared, he turned to us, his face pale, his eyes full of something I'd never seen before. Betrayal. "You tried to destroy my work," he whispered. "You tried to destroy everything." Then he hit Samuel hard enough that he fell and didn't move for a moment. I threw myself over him, screaming. Father's hand hovered in the air, trembling, then he lowered it. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll never see light again." The next morning he boarded the window shut completely. Not a single crack of daylight remained. But what he didn't know was that the fire had changed something in us. We'd seen light, real light, even if it was only for a few seconds. It was enough to remind us what the world could look like, and no amount of darkness could ever erase that. I remember the day the visitor came because it was the first time in years I heard a voice other than Father's. It was deep, warm, uncertain, the kind of voice that carried sunlight with it. It filtered up through the floorboards like a ghost from another world. I didn't know who it belonged to then, but later I learned his name was Pastor Lewis. That morning had started like any other. Father had brought our food late, a small bowl of porridge gone cold. His hands trembled as he slid it through the slot. He'd been quieter lately, pacing downstairs more, muttering under his breath. I could tell something outside the house was making him nervous. His eyes darted to the window each time a cart rolled past. He had started locking every door twice. When I pressed my ear to the floor after he left, I heard something unusual, footsteps. Not just Father's, but another pair. Slower, heavier, unfamiliar. Then came that voice. "Arthur Raymond?" Father answered quickly, his tone overly polite, almost cheerful. "Pastor Lewis." What an unexpected blessing. A pause. Then the pastor said softly, "The congregation hasn't seen you in weeks. Some of the ladies are worried. They say they've heard noises, and your wife, gone." Father interrupted sharply. "She left. Couldn't handle city life. The children are safe with relatives." I felt Samuel stiffen beside me. We both leaned closer, straining to catch every word. "I see," the pastor said slowly. "Well, we all hoped she'd come back. The house feels lonely without her." Father laughed. Then a hollow sound that didn't belong to him. "I prefer peace. The world outside is poison, Pastor. My children are better off away from it." My heart raced. I wanted to scream through the floor to tell that kind voice we were here, that we were still alive. But fear held my tongue. The floorboards creaked again. I imagined the pastor's shoes near the stairs, maybe even the bottom step that led to us. "Mind if I step inside?" he asked. Father hesitated. I could hear it in his silence. Then he said, "Of course, but the house is under repair, dangerous, you see. Best not go upstairs." My chest tightened. He was protecting his secret, protecting the lie that had become our cage. Samuel whispered beside me, "If he comes up here, we'll be free." His eyes were wide, trembling with a mix of hope and fear. We waited, listening. The floor below us creaked again, and for a moment, I thought the pastor really was coming closer, but Father's voice stopped from him. "I insist, Pastor. Let's talk outside." Their voices moved toward the door. Then came the faint click of it closing, and silence filled the attic once again. Samuel sank against the wall, his fists clenched. He was right there, Emily, right there. I didn't answer, I couldn't, because for the first time in years I had felt what hope sounded like, and then I'd heard it walk away. Later that evening, Father returned. His face was pale and his hands shook when he carried the tray. He didn't speak at first. Then he said, "You heard him, didn't you?" We didn't answer. He sighed, setting the tray down with a trembling hand. "He doesn't understand. None of them do. They'd take you away from me. They'd fill your heads with filth." His tone grew harsher, sharper with every word. "You belong here. This is your home. I protect you." I felt Samuel's hand brush mine. He was shaking. Father's voice rose, cracking like ice underfoot. "Do you think they care about you? The world will break you. The world kills children like you." Then he slammed the door shut and locked it, harder than ever before. That night, he didn't return. We heard him moving below, hammering at something. The sound echoed through the floor, over and over, bang, bang, bang. When morning came, the air in the attic felt different. He had boarded up the last cracks of light from the window. We were sealed in completely. No light, no air, only darkness. The first day passed in silence, the second in whispers. By the third, we were too weak to speak at all. I remember lying beside Samuel, counting the seconds by the sound of our breathing. Then faintly, a sound broke the silence, a tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But Samuel sat up suddenly, his head tilted. "No," he whispered. "That's someone knocking." We both crawled to the wall and pressed our ears against it. There it was again, 3 sharp knocks, a pause. Then 2 more. Someone was outside. We froze, terrified Father might hear too. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved from the wall to the floorboards, then back again. It was rhythmic, careful, like a signal. "Who is it?" Samuel whispered, even though he knew they couldn't hear him. His fingers brushed the boards, as if trying to send a message back. But then, suddenly, Father's footsteps thundered up the stairs. We scrambled back just as the trapdoor flew open. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot. "Who were you talking to?" he shouted. "No one," I cried. "We didn't." He didn't let me finish. He stormed in, grabbed Samuel by the shoulders and shook him violently. "Did you tell someone? Did you make them come here?" Samuel struggled to breathe. "No, Father. I swear." Father shoved him away, pacing in circles. "They're watching me," he muttered. "They always watch. The neighbors, the church they want to take. You." He turned suddenly toward the window and began hammering more boards over it, muttering between each strike. "You'll be safe. Safe from them. Safe from her." I didn't understand who her was until later. After that night, the house grew even quieter. Father barely brought food. We could hear him downstairs talking to someone who wasn't there. Sometimes he laughed. Other times he cried. Once, I heard him whisper, "I had to do it, Cordelia. You left me no choice." That name again, our mother's. One evening we heard something different, the sound of papers rustling, drawers slamming, furniture breaking. Then his voice, "They'll never find it, never." We stayed huddled in a corner, afraid even to breathe. Hours later, as the house settled into silence, Samuel whispered, "He's hiding something." I nodded. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it too. Something dark, buried in that house like a wound that never healed. Days passed, and Father stopped visiting entirely. Hunger gnawed at us until even moving hurt. I tried to stay awake, to listen for the sound of the pastor's voice again, but there was nothing, just the wind, whistling through cracks that no longer showed light. Then one afternoon we heard footsteps, not Father's. Softer, slower, cautious. They stopped right under us. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Hello?" a voice called faintly. "Anyone there?" It was him, Pastor Lewis. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth to call back, but I clapped my hand over it. "No," I whispered, "if Father hears." But then we heard the front door slam open, followed by Father's shouting, "Get out! I told you to leave us alone." The pastor's voice rose in alarm. "Arthur, people are worried. They hear screams, lies," Father bellowed. "You think you can come into my home and judge me?" There was a struggle, heavy footsteps, something crashing to the floor, then silence. The silence that followed was the worst kind, deep and endless. We didn't know if the pastor had escaped or if Father had silenced him forever. That night, Father didn't return to the attic. The door remained locked and the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. Samuel looked at me and whispered, "He's losing control." And I realized he was right. Because after that day, Father began doing something even stranger. He started sleeping in the attic doorway, like a guard dog watching his own prison. Sometimes he'd mutter while half asleep, his words slurring together. "They want to take you, but you're mine, mine." The visitor had brought something into our lives, not salvation, not rescue, but chaos. His brief presence had cracked open Father's fragile world, and through that crack, something else had started to grow, a dangerous, defiant hope. The days that followed the visitor's brief intrusion became a turning point in our lives, though we didn't understand it at the time. The atmosphere in the house had shifted, and we could feel it in the way Father moved, in the tension that crackled in every room. He was no longer the controlled, meticulous man we had always feared. Something in him had fractured. His pace was erratic, his temper shorter, and his gaze sharper. Every shadow seemed to make him flinch, every sound outside the walls a potential threat. Samuel and I watched him from the attic, our senses heightened by months of silent observation. The visitor, Pastor Lewis, had left a mark on Father that was subtle but profound. Even if he hadn't realized it consciously, the idea that someone could see through his carefully constructed world rattled him. He was used to controlling everything, the light, the sounds, our meals, our thoughts, yet here was someone who had penetrated his fortress, even if only for a few fleeting moments. I noticed the first signs of his unraveling one morning. The food he brought was cold, as usual, but the portions were smaller. He had forgotten the routine of laying out the tray in its usual place, leaving it instead in the corner of the attic floor. Samuel and I had grown accustomed to accepting what he gave us without complaint, but something about that day made the hunger feel different, sharper, more urgent. Father's absence was a void filled with uncertainty, and it gnawed at both of us. Then came the noises. Father had begun moving objects around the house in a frenzy, furniture scraping across floors, doors banging open and closed, drawers slamming shut. At first we thought it was part of his usual intimidation tactics, but the rhythm was different. There was a nervous edge to it, a randomness that made the house feel alive with tension. I remember holding Samuel close, whispering, "He's not in control anymore. Can't you feel it?" Samuel nodded, his eyes wide with both fear and anticipation. We had never felt hope before, not like this. But there was a glimmer now, a dangerous curiosity. The real breaking point came when Father began speaking aloud to himself. He would pace the attic floor for hours, muttering phrases that seemed both rehearsed and spontaneous. "They think they know. They will never take them. I protect them. I protect them." Over and over, as if repeating a mantra to convince himself of his own omnipotence. But the repetition did not restore his composure. Instead, it revealed the cracks beneath the surface. We began to notice the contradictions in his words, the inconsistencies in his stories. He claimed the outside world was full of dangers, yet he increasingly left windows unlocked, doors unlatched. He spoke of enemies who lurked in every corner, yet often forgot to check the hinges or the locks. His mind was working at odds with itself, a machine slowly falling apart from overuse. One evening, Samuel and I heard him calling out for someone named Cordelia. His voice was trembling, raw with emotion, something I had never heard before. "Cordelia, where are you? You left me alone. You can't leave me. They're coming for the children." It wasn't just a name, it was a revelation. Father was no longer speaking to us, or to the visitor, or to anyone alive. He was speaking to the past, to a memory, to a phantom. The sound of him calling for our mother filled the attic with a grief I could almost touch. Samuel squeezed my hand. I could feel him shaking. "He's losing it," he whispered. I realized then that the very system of fear and control that Father had built over the years was starting to collapse. The strategies he had relied on, isolation, manipulation, conditioning, were failing because the structure of his mind itself was weakening. Every day he became less consistent, more unpredictable, more dangerous. It was in that unpredictability that I began to understand the opportunity before us. The visitor, though gone, had opened a crack. We could feel it widening with each passing day. Yet fear remained a constant companion. Father could turn his rage on us in an instant, and we had no allies, no tools, no plan. Our survival depended entirely on observation, patience, and timing. Father's instability revealed itself most clearly in his attempts to reinforce his control. He began staging lessons for us, but these were no longer coherent or structured. He would tell Samuel and me stories about the dangers outside, but the details kept changing. One day the world was full of men who would steal children. The next, it was women who would poison them. Sometimes he claimed both were coming, circling closer each night. The contradictions made us uncertain, but also revealed that his grip on reality was slipping. I began cataloging these inconsistencies silently, in my mind, like a ledger of his vulnerabilities. I noted the times when he forgot to check the traps, the hours when he dozed too long in the day, the occasions when he left tools or keys within reach. Each oversight was a potential lifeline, a small window through which freedom might be glimpsed. Samuel, though younger, was acutely aware of the danger, and his instincts were sharper than mine in many ways. He noticed patterns I missed, the subtle shifts in father's mood, the small tells that betrayed when he was on the verge of a violent outburst. Together we began to anticipate his movements, to understand the rhythm of his paranoia. The nights were the worst. Father would roam the house, muttering and pacing, often stopping to listen at the attic floorboards. We learned to lie perfectly still, holding our breath, sometimes for hours. Any slight sound could provoke him. Yet these nights also gave us the clearest view of his unraveling mind. He would sometimes whisper to himself in the corners of the room, practicing arguments that he would never deliver, rehearsing threats against imaginary intruders. It was during one of these nights that the first real opportunity appeared. Father had left the trapdoor slightly ajar, a mistake he never made before. I felt Samuel's hand on mine, trembling with the same mixture of fear and hope that had become our constant companion. "Emily," he whispered, we could try tonight." My heart pounded. I knew the risks. One false move, one misstep, and he could discover us, and there would be no mercy. Yet the urgency of freedom, the desire to escape the years of isolation, was overwhelming. Father's own paranoia was the tool we would use against him. We had learned every pattern, every quirk, every obsession. We had catalogued his fears, and now we could exploit them. The first step was simple but terrifying: move silently across the floor, remain unseen, and observe until the timing was perfect. The next days became a meticulous preparation. Samuel and I rationed our food carefully, conserving energy for the moment when action would be necessary. We practiced crawling silently along the attic beams, learning to make no sound at all. We memorized every weak point in the boards, every loose nail, every creak that Father ignored in his growing madness. We also began experimenting with small tests of his awareness. We dropped a spoon deliberately, making just enough sound to see if he reacted. Sometimes he would ignore it, sometimes he would storm the attic in rage, shouting and hammering. Each reaction taught us more about his speed, about his predictability, about the exact moments we could move without being caught. All the while, the shadow of Pastor Lewis loomed over us. His brief intrusion had given us a model, a proof that someone from outside could reach Father's world, could challenge it, and could perhaps rescue us. It was an inspiration we clung to, though we knew no one else might come again. Father, for his part, continued to descend further into obsession. He began marking lines on the walls, strange codes that we did not understand. He talked to invisible people, moving furniture as if creating barriers or traps for intruders that existed only in his mind. Yet the very complexity of these rituals slowed him down, created gaps in his vigilance, and revealed cracks in the once impenetrable fortress he had built around us. I felt a mixture of fear, hope, and determination growing inside me. Fear of being caught, hope of freedom, and determination that we could not remain trapped any longer. The breaking point wasn't just Father's instability, it was ours too. A point where fear transformed into action, where survival instincts outweighed obedience. And so we waited, counting days, rehearsing movements, and observing every detail. Samuel and I had become shadows of ourselves, yet sharper, more aware, more resilient than ever before. The breaking point was approaching, the moment when Father's mind, consumed by paranoia and obsession, would falter enough for us to seize the chance for freedom. I didn't know when it would come. I only knew it was near. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The night was darker than usual, an oppressive black that pressed against the windows and crept into the corners of the attic where Samuel and I lay in tense silence. Every breath felt heavy, every movement weighted with anticipation. We had waited for this moment for months. Ever since we recognized the cracks in Father's mind, ever since we understood that his obsession had begun to consume him. This was the night we would either take our first real step toward freedom or be caught and punished beyond anything we had yet endured. I whispered to Samuel, my voice barely audible. "Remember everything we practiced. Stay close. Move only when I say." He nodded, gripping my hand, his small fingers trembling but determined. We had rehearsed this plan over and over in our minds, perfecting every detail. Every creak in the attic floorboards, every weak point in the door latch, every shadow that could hide us, we knew them all. But the stakes had never been higher. Father's presence in the house had been unpredictable that evening. We could hear him muttering in the distance, his voice alternating between rage and desperation. They think they can take them. They'll never take them. No one will ever understand. The repetition of phrases that once seemed like mantras now sounded like the ravings of a mind unraveling entirely. Each word was both a warning and an opportunity. His obsession with control had become his weakness. The first step required us to descend from the attic to the stairwell without making a sound. The trapdoor had been left slightly ajar, a mistake that we would exploit. Samuel went first, sliding down the ladder with careful precision, testing each rung for stability. I followed immediately, feeling the old wood strain under my weight but holding firm. Our hearts pounded in unison, the rhythm a silent drum of fear and adrenaline. We moved slowly, crouching low, using shadows to conceal our forms. Every creak in the floorboards sent a jolt of panic through us, but we had learned to wait, to pause, to listen. The house was no longer the predictable environment we had been confined in for so long. It had become a labyrinth of danger, and yet, paradoxically, a path to freedom. Father's pacing had grown erratic. Occasionally, we could hear his footsteps approach, heavy and deliberate, and then recede, leaving a silence that was almost worse than his presence. We held our breath during these moments, counting each second, feeling the tension coil tighter in our chests. Samuel whispered, "Do you think he knows?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until we're too far gone." The hallway outside the attic stretched before us like a gauntlet. Shadows from the moonlight streaked across the floorboards, revealing the dust and decay that years of isolation had left behind. We had memorized every obstacle, every loose board, every fragment of glass that might betray our presence. Step by step we advanced, moving with a grace born of desperation. Father's voice suddenly erupted from the kitchen below. "Who's there? I know you're moving." The sound was jagged, laced with panic and rage. We froze, pressing ourselves against the wall, hearts pounding violently. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the darkness pressing down on us from all sides. Then, silence returned, broken only by the occasional creak of a floorboard far away. We pressed onward, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. The scent of dust and old wood filled my nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Samuel's grip on my hand tightened, and I whispered reassurances we both knew were hollow. Almost there. Almost out. The final obstacle was the back door, which led to the narrow alley behind the house. Father had always been vigilant about securing it, but in his growing paranoia, he had begun leaving it unlocked, distracted by his own imagined enemies. We approached it cautiously, listening for any sign that he was nearby. The lock was old and rusted, but still resistant. Samuel and I had practiced opening it with a bent piece of wire we had hidden for months. Now, trembling, we used it, and after what felt like hours but was only seconds, the lock clicked. The door creaked as we pushed it open, a sound so loud it seemed to echo through the entire house. I held my breath, ready to dive back into the shadows if Father appeared, but there was no response. Samuel squeezed my hand. "We did it. We're out." The alley was narrow and lined with trash and debris, but it was freedom nonetheless. The night air was cold, sharp against our skin, yet invigorating. For the first time in our lives, we could breathe without the oppressive weight of Father's presence. Every step we took felt like a small victory. Every sound from the outside world a reassurance that we were alive, that we were no longer trapped. We moved quickly, staying in the shadows, avoiding the main streets where anyone might see us. Samuel had a small satchel with provisions we had managed to hide over time, a few scraps of bread, a flask of water, and the precious wire we had used to unlock the door. These meager supplies felt like treasures, a lifeline to the unknown world beyond the house. Our journey took us through back alleys and abandoned lots, places we had only seen from windows, but now navigated with growing confidence. The city was unfamiliar, vast and terrifying, yet exhilarating. Every step forward was a step into reality, into a world we had been denied for so long. We had a plan, simple but risky: reach the river and follow it downstream, hoping to find someone who could help. The city streets were empty at this hour, save for the occasional stray dog or distant carriage. Samuel and I kept close to the walls, shadows among shadows, our senses alert to every sound, every movement. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time had lost its meaning in our captivity. Our muscles ached, our stomachs protested, but the urgency of survival propelled us forward. Samuel's small hand in mine was both a comfort and a reminder of our bond, the one thing that had kept us sane in the attic. As dawn approached, the first light of day revealed the river, a silver thread winding through the city. Relief washed over us, though we did not slow our pace. The water represented hope, movement, a path to life beyond the nightmare. We followed its banks, listening for signs of civilization, for voices, for help. At last we encountered a figure, a fisherman tending his small boat. Samuel and I approached cautiously, uncertain whether this was another danger or salvation. The man looked up, startled, and then his expression softened as he took in our disheveled, frightened faces. "Children?" he asked gently. "Are you lost?" Tears sprang to my eyes. "Yes, we need help," I managed to whisper. Samuel clung to my side, trembling but nodding. The fisherman, sensing our urgency and fragility, guided us to a nearby shelter, providing food, warmth, and first aid. It was the first time in our lives that we had received kindness untainted by fear. Every bite of food, every gentle word, every soft touch was a revelation. Samuel and I began to understand what it meant to be safe, to be seen not as experiments or curiosities, but as children deserving of care. The authorities were notified immediately. Investigators arrived, documenting our rescue, taking notes, and asking questions gently, with patience and understanding. Samuel and I recounted as much as we could, our words halting and fragmented, but truthful. The story of the attic, of Father's control, of our years in isolation began to emerge, piece by piece. Father, of course, was nowhere near us. The authorities had apprehended him hours later, stumbling through the house, confused and frantic, his empire of fear crumbling around him. His psychological breakdown had accelerated in our absence, leaving him vulnerable and disoriented. For Samuel and me, the escape was only the first step. It marked the end of captivity, but the beginning of recovery. We were free. Yet the shadow of our trauma lingered. Nightmares, phobias, and memories of manipulation haunted us. But in that moment, as we sat by the river, surrounded by warmth, light, and genuine human compassion, we allowed ourselves to hope. Hope was a fragile thing, yet it was ours to nurture. We had survived. We had escaped. And now, for the first time in our lives, we could imagine a future beyond the walls that had imprisoned us. After escaping Father's house, the world felt both overwhelming and miraculous. Every sound, every color, every gust of wind was a revelation. Samuel and I had been deprived of the simplest experiences for years, yet now they struck us with a combination of fear and wonder. The first days were the most difficult, as our minds and bodies struggled to reconcile freedom with the trauma that had been inflicted on us. The simplest acts, walking on uneven ground, feeling sunlight on our skin, tasting new foods, were terrifying at first. Each moment carried the risk of triggering memories of the attic, Father's voice, the controlled darkness, the sense that the outside world was filled with danger. We were placed under the care of compassionate authorities who understood our delicate condition. Dr. Jonathan McFadden, a child psychiatrist with experience in extreme trauma, became our guiding presence. His calm voice, patient demeanor, and unwavering empathy provided a sense of safety we had never known. "It's okay," he would say repeatedly. "You are safe now. Nothing can hurt you." I was here. These words, simple as they were, became our anchor. Samuel and I clung to them, repeating them to ourselves when fear threatened to consume us. The first major challenge was adjusting to a world filled with light. Years of confinement had left our eyes highly sensitive, and even the dim glow of dawn caused headaches and nausea. Dr. McFadden implemented a gradual exposure program, introducing light in controlled doses, allowing our eyes to adapt slowly. We spent hours sitting near windows with blinds partially drawn, gradually increasing the exposure. Each day brought small victories, a few minutes longer outside, a single step into the sunlight without panicking. Food, too, became a battleground. Father had conditioned us to believe that only he and Vera could prepare safe meals. Any deviation from his routines caused panic, refusal to eat, and distress. The hospital staff had to employ patience and ingenuity, preparing food slowly, introducing new tastes incrementally, and reinforcing our ability to make safe choices. The simple act of eating became a triumph, a declaration of independence from Father's control. Communication presented another unique challenge. Samuel and I had developed our own language, a mixture of whispers, gestures, and invented words that only we understood. It had been our survival mechanism, a private world within Father's oppressive one. Now, it became both a bridge and a barrier. Linguistic specialists were brought in to decode our language, patiently introducing English words and grammar while respecting the vocabulary we had created. At first, speaking in English was exhausting and confusing, but slowly we began to connect with others, sharing our thoughts and feelings more clearly. Psychological recovery was the most arduous journey. Father had instilled in us profound fear of the outside world and deep mistrust of strangers. Every new person, every unexpected noise, every change in routine triggered panic. Therapy sessions were gradual, building on trust and consistency. Dr. McFadden introduced activities designed to separate us from each other temporarily, helping us develop individual identities while assuring us of our bond. The process was delicate, balancing the need for independence with the trauma of separation. As weeks turned into months, small milestones emerged. Samuel began to explore his environment with curiosity rather than fear. He asked questions about the world, about animals, about the stars. I found myself sketching scenes from memory, translating the attic's darkness into drawings that expressed both fear and resilience. We began to interact with other children at the hospital, though cautiously, slowly learning that friendship could exist without manipulation or danger. After careful assessment, it was determined that we required a stable home environment to continue recovery. The Langley family, experienced in caring for traumatized children, offered us their home. Stanton and Catherine Langley had endured loss themselves, having lost their own children to illness, and had dedicated their lives to helping others rebuild. Their home was modified to suit our needs: adjustable lighting, safe spaces for retreat, and structured routines that provided security without confinement. Education was approached with the same care. Catherine Langley, a former teacher specializing in children with special needs, developed a curriculum that introduced real-world concepts gradually. Academic lessons were paired with social-emotional learning, helping us understand relationships, empathy, and societal norms. Samuel excelled in mathematics and logic, his analytical mind thriving when freed from the constraints of Father's manipulations. I found solace in art and music, creating expressions of emotions that had no place in the attic. Socialization remained a slow process. Our interactions with the community and other children were carefully supervised. Trust had to be rebuilt from the ground up, starting with small gestures, shared activities, and consistent reassurance. We began to understand that people could be kind, that not every smile hid a threat, and that love and care were real, not tools of manipulation. Therapy continued alongside our education. Dr. McFadden monitored triggers and regressions, using each setback as a teaching moment. We learned coping strategies for fear and anxiety, techniques for communication, and methods for managing emotional responses. The process was painstakingly slow, but progress, no matter how incremental, reinforced the possibility of a future free from fear. After 2 years with the Langleys, we transitioned to Riverside School, a specialized institution for children recovering from trauma. The school provided a structured environment, allowing us to interact with peers who had faced different but significant hardships. Observing others' resilience helped us contextualize our own experiences, understanding that our survival was not a solitary triumph, but part of a shared human capacity for recovery. Friendships emerged tentatively. Samuel and I remained inseparable, yet we were encouraged to develop connections beyond each other. The school staff facilitated group activities that allowed us to practice social skills, navigate boundaries, and develop confidence. Each successful interaction, no matter how small, was celebrated as a victory over the years of psychological imprisonment we had endured. Our education progressed rapidly. Samuel's aptitude for numbers and critical thinking became apparent, and he excelled in mathematics and logic-based subjects. I continued to cultivate artistic skills, exploring painting, drawing, and music, using creativity as a vehicle for emotional expression. Historical, social, and geographical concepts were more challenging, requiring intensive tutoring to bridge the gaps left by Father's manipulations. Yet we embraced the challenge, motivated by a desire to understand the world we had been denied. The legal aftermath of Father's actions had concluded. He had been sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, a fact that offered closure but little comfort. The focus shifted entirely to rebuilding our lives, to creating a narrative separate from the darkness we had endured. Vera Clark, though initially complicit, had revealed the truth and was posthumously recognized for her courage. Her actions had ensured our survival, a reminder that even in a world dominated by cruelty, compassion could prevail. By the time we reached adulthood, we had established stability. Samuel became a respected accountant, a profession that allowed him to harness his analytical mind in a productive, ethical environment. I became an elementary school teacher, dedicated to nurturing children and ensuring they received the guidance and care that had been denied to us. We both married, built families, and carried forward the lessons of resilience, empathy, and the importance of protection for the vulnerable. Yet, the shadows of our early years remained. Certain behaviors heightened sensitivity to sudden noises, the instinct to retreat into darkness when frightened, and a profound need for reassurance persisted. These were not weaknesses, but markers of survival, evidence of the extremes we had endured and overcome. They reminded us that trauma does not vanish, but it can be integrated into a life filled with meaning, love, and purpose. Throughout our lives, we maintained our bond. Weekly visits, shared holidays, and mutual support were constants. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of fear and manipulation, became a source of strength. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, connection, loyalty, and trust could survive, grow, and thrive. Dr. McFadden visited periodically, documenting our progress and advising on continued therapeutic interventions. His observation highlighted the remarkable resilience of the human mind. Despite years of psychological control, isolation, and fear, we had not only survived, but adapted, developed skills, and formed meaningful relationships. Our journey became a testament to the potential for recovery, the power of compassionate intervention, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The story of our captivity, though harrowing, became a symbol of hope. It demonstrated that even in the face of calculated cruelty, intervention, support, and love could restore a sense of normalcy and security. Samuel and I learned to navigate a world that had once been incomprehensible, finding joy in simple pleasures, fulfillment in work, and connection in relationships. Looking back, the lessons of our past remain clear. Education, intelligence, and social respectability, while valuable, do not guarantee morality or compassion. Father possessed all societal markers of success, yet his actions revealed a profound absence of empathy. In contrast, the kindness of strangers, the dedication of professionals like Dr. McFadden, and the enduring love of the Langley family proved that human goodness could triumph over even the darkest designs. Today, Samuel and I live lives marked by balance, love, and purpose. Our experiences have instilled in us a vigilance for injustice, a commitment to protect the vulnerable, and a deep appreciation for the fragility and resilience of the human mind. We share our story not to dwell in trauma, but to ensure that the lessons of the past endure, that vigilance, empathy, and courage are essential in safeguarding those who cannot protect themselves. Our journey from darkness into light stands as proof that recovery, while arduous, is possible. The world beyond Father's house is vast and beautiful, filled with opportunities, relationships, and experiences we were once denied. And though the past shapes us, it does not define us. Samuel and I emerged not only as survivors, but as witnesses to the strength of human resilience, the enduring power of compassion, and the possibility of hope, even after unimaginable darkness.